What's going on, everyone? Welcome to the Wednesday, July 10th edition of the Ship My Money Show Tournament Thoughts Edition. I'm your host, Adam Scherer. You can follow me on Twitter at ShipMyMoney DFS. And we have a 10-game MLB slate tonight. No weather issues, so it should not be nearly as much of a headache as last night's slate was, hopefully, at least not because of weather. Players obviously have something to say about it. But this is the third time I'm doing this show. I enjoy doing it, and the response has been pretty good, so I plan on continuing to do it as long as people continue to want it. Give the video a thumbs up, like the video, subscribe to the channel. All that stuff helps out quite a bit. Throw comments that you have throughout the show in chat. Glad to get to those as I see them. But on this one, I'm not going game by game like I did this morning. Already done that. Boring to do it again. I'm going to just take a look at what I would be playing if the slate started right now or started a few minutes ago when I ran all this stuff. If you're looking at the screen, you can see that I was getting to Bryce Harper, and he was the Phillies lineup came out right as this show started. But this is how I would have been playing the slate if, with projected lineups at like 4:45, 4:50 Eastern. So we can take a look at the specific players I'm getting to, what the lineups look like with some of the more chalky players, so you can get an idea for good ways to build lineups and stuff like that. Because as I've said a lot of times on shows going back a very long time, it's more about the types of lineups that you're playing than it is the individual players. Obviously, you'll get individual player exposures moving up and down depending on how easy it is to make lineups that you expect to be plus EV with them in it. But there's always a focus on individual players. So I think that this show should show that there's different ways that you can approach individual players, whether you want to get to them or not. Randy said, can you talk a little bit about single entry GPPs? Yeah, but it's not really relevant to this because I built these lineups with large field tournaments in mind. The adjustment that I would say you're generally going to make is that for single entry is that you're playing typically against smaller fields. So if you're playing smaller field single entry tournaments, then some of these, really low owned contrarian stacks are just not really going to be as useful to you. If you're playing larger field single entry, then they still probably are, because in single entry, you will generally get ownership more concentrated on the most popular players. So for example, on this slate where you have Frankie Montas as a popular SP2 on DraftKings going up against the Rockies. In larger field single entry, you may still want to get to the Rockies because Montas will be really popular probably. In your smaller field stuff, he'll be really popular, but you probably don't need to go to, so far down the board of offenses to get to Colorado. Whereas in large field stuff, you probably do. Also, as a reminder, this is DraftKings specific. The show in the morning, generally what I say is going to apply to FanDuel with a couple of exceptions. Here, it's less so. The same concepts and strategies certainly apply to FanDuel, but there will be spots where, again, using Colorado as an example, I think I am getting to them somewhat today because Montas is so popular on DraftKings. He's not going to be nearly as popular on FanDuel. So the benefit of getting to Colorado on that site is smaller. They're still in a good park. Montas is still a mediocre pitcher. All of that stuff obviously carries over regardless of site, but the negative correlation piece will be different when you look at DraftKings compared to FanDuel. So keep that in mind. But obviously, it would take twice as much effort to prepare, and more importantly, take me twice as long to do the show if I did the same thing for FanDuel. So don't necessarily just copy everything from here and then try and apply it on FanDuel. But the way I think about the slate and approach the slate is obviously the same regardless of site. You're just paying attention to different ownership and all of that. Chris Logan said, what would be the best game or team to target if we're going for multiple home runs? I mean, any park that is good for hitting, probably Fenway or the Cincinnati game. But there are a lot of good hitters parks on this slate. Philadelphia, the pitching is a little bit better, but good hitters park there. Milwaukee's a good hitters park. Angel Stadium's a good hitters park. But Boston and Cincinnati, I think, are your best two spots to be targeting home runs, salary agnostic and all of that. Those are, I think, the two games that I'll be looking at the most. So starting here, and again, not going game by game, going to be bouncing around more position by position, pitchers and hitters bouncing through that way. But taking a look here at my pitcher exposures first on DraftKings, and we can see I'm pretty concentrated on three guys at the top. That's not really unusual for me. I generally am happy to play chalk pitching a little bit more than hitting because it's only taking up one spot in your lineup and because it's a little bit more projectable. There is still obviously a lot of volatility in pitching, but I am generally a little bit more willing to just eat popular pitching there. You can see that these are projected to be the three most popular pitchers on the slate. I'm getting at least a little bit over the field on all three of them with Frankie Montas, Framber Valdez, and Nick Pivetta. But the reason that I am getting to them so heavily is that I do think they all just stand out as the best pitchers in their price range, and none of them are getting that much ownership. Obviously, 30 or so percent ownership is a lot, but if that ownership projection holds, I am still willing to get there. Montas at 7K, he has been solid recently, and that's something that I don't really care about all that much for most pitchers. But for Montas, I do think it's something worth mentioning because this is somebody that has a track record throughout most of his time in the major leagues of being a pretty solid right-handed pitcher going back to his time in Oakland. He was coming back from an injury this year, missed the better part of 2 seasons. He struggled pretty heavily out of the gate. He has put together a string of good starts, though, so that's nice to see. It doesn't necessarily mean that everything that happened early in the season was rust and that everything from this point forward is going to be good, but it is good, obviously, better to see him pitching well recently than if he just weren't pitching well. So that's good to see. And then he does have the good matchup here with Colorado as well. The Rockies are one of the weaker offenses in baseball. They're 5th in strikeout percentage against right-handed pitching. They have an 85 WRC plus on their active roster. This is a good park to pitch in, or to hit in rather. It's a dangerous spot for pitching, so that is working against him. In addition to, we still don't really know what his true talent level is at this point. But at 7K on this particular slate, where we really don't have a lot of good pitching at all, I'm fine just getting to him. I do expect, and I've already mentioned it sort of a couple of times already, I do expect that in non-Montas lineups, I probably do have a good amount of Colorado because I do think that they're a good team to stack in large field DraftKings tournaments because Montas is getting ownership as a result of simply being cheap and being one of the least bad pitchers on the slate. Whenever you get that combination of guys as an SP2 on DraftKings getting ownership, I do like stacking against them, but it doesn't mean that I'm not going to play them too. So getting to Montas a lot here. And then the other two, I certainly feel a lot more comfortable with. Framber Valdez, only 8,300 on DraftKings. This is one of the bigger price discrepancies between DraftKings and FanDuel. He's fine on FanDuel, but he's 9,800 if I remember correctly, somewhere in that range. 8,300 on DraftKings. The salary has fully adjusted for Framber Valdez not getting a lot of strikeouts this year, only striking out around 19% of hitters. But at 8,300, that's accounted for. And he's still good at limiting power, limiting production, preventing runs. And then on top of that, he has a very favorable matchup against the Marlins. They rank middle of the pack in strikeout percentage against left-handed pitching. They have an 86 WRC plus on their active roster against left-handed pitching since the start of last season. Their best player is left-handed, so you have the platoon advantage for Valdez in the matchup with Jazz Chisholm, assuming he's in the lineup. I don't actually know what their lineup looks like. We don't have it yet, but obviously they have a little bit of right-handed power with guys like De La Cruz and Jake Berger, but whenever you're taking a pitcher against Miami, the guy that you're most worried about is Chisholm. So it is nice when you get a left-handed pitcher against him as well. Righties this year, only a 130 expected ISO against Valdez. Lefties, sub 100 expected ISO. So he's, like I said, still very good at preventing runs, very fairly priced on DraftKings, even accounting for him not being a great strikeout pitcher. And then the third guy I'm getting a lot of, Nick Pivetta, in another hitter's park. So you do have the same concern with him that you do with Montas as far as Fenway Park is one of the more favorable hitters parks on the slate or in general. It plays up power. Pivetta struggles with power, but he is a really good strikeout pitcher. We don't have many of those today. He has the highest strikeout percentage of any pitcher on tonight's slate at 28%. The next highest of anybody on the main slate is Morton at 24%. And then you have to drop all the way down to Tobias Myers at 21.5% for anybody that has any sort of a sample size so far this season. So that really speaks to just how big the gap is in strikeout ability from Pivetta to basically anyone else. And then on top of that, he has this matchup with Oakland, who has the second highest strikeout percentage against right-handed pitching this year. They do have power in their lineup. It's not a safe matchup. He, is pretty likely to give up home runs. Like if you hit the ball against Pivetta, you generally hit it really far. It's just a matter of putting it in play. But he does have this matchup against a team that strikes out a lot. So while it is a boom or bust spot, and I do think getting to Oakland makes sense, I also want to be getting to Pivetta. And then beyond that, you can see that I'm just kind of mixing in a lot of different pitchers. There's nobody else really on this slate that stands out to me when you consider their salaries and their matchups. Logan Webb, I'm getting to about 10%. Fields projected around 17%. He is a good pitcher. He's basically Framber Valdez, but at $9,800. Tough matchup against Toronto, more difficult matchup than Valdez has against Miami. Webb is not a very high K guy. It is a good park. He is a good pitcher at preventing runs, but you're just kind of paying a premium. His salary isn't adjusted for his lack of strikeouts the way that Valdez's is. So he's not showing up a ton for me, but I am getting there some. Tobias Myers facing the Pirates. Will be interesting to see what the Pirates lineup ends up looking like. O'Neal Cruz didn't play yesterday. He's dealing with a hamstring injury. So you could get a watered down Pirates lineup, in which case Myers starts to look a little bit better. But he's just another guy right now pulling around 15% ownership at 7,700. 21.5% K percentage. Pretty decent matchup with the Pirates, regardless of who is playing. They are sixth in strikeout percentage against right-handed pitching, but obviously he does look a little bit better if Cruz is not in the lineup and it's like Jared Triolo or something instead. So he just looks okay. It is a hitter-friendly park. Kyle Freeland, 5K against the Reds, not getting any ownership. I'm getting to like 8%. I talked about him a lot on the show this morning, or at least a lot more than I would ever like to talk about Kyle Freeland. He's not a good pitcher. He's not a good strikeout pitcher. He is getting a park upgrade, technically getting out of Colorado, but I don't totally hate the idea of just punting SP2 on DraftKings with a really cheap guy. Anytime you have a fully stretched out major league starting pitcher at 5K, by default, he's underpriced. The Reds are going to get ownership too, though. So normally when I talk about negative correlation, it's with the context of stacking against the popular pitcher. But it does, at least to some extent, work the other direction as well, where you're probably going to be getting like 15% ownership, give or take, to most guys in the Cincinnati lineup. If Freeland happens to somehow miraculously have a good game, you are knocking off, 10, 15% of the field that has these Cincinnati bats. So I don't totally hate that. If we look at the Kyle Freeland lineups I have, I would guess that either one, I'm stacking a popular team, or two, I just have really, really high upside, either stacks and or one-offs around them. So here, like looking at this Kyle Freeland lineup, Framber Valdez is the SP2. So I have a popular SP2 and one of the better SP2s. And then I'm just getting to two of the better stacks today. A Mets 3-man with a Rangers 5-man. The Rangers are not super expensive, but I'm getting to the most expensive Rangers here. You can see I'm not throwing in like the Leody Taveras punt to afford Texas. And then I'm getting to three of the good Mets bats against Corbin: $4,800 Martinez, $5,200 Alonso, $4,200 Alvarez. So this is a lineup where I would be sacrificing some upside. Like I could go from Kyle Freeland to one of those 7 to 8K pitchers, like a Frankie Montas or Tobias Myers. But I would have to drop from like JD Martinez down to like Harrison Bader or something, and maybe from like Adolis Garcia down to Taveras. So you can see that I am really maximizing my upside with two of the more popular, but also higher upside offenses on the slate. Here we have another Valdez team with the Phillies and the Red Sox. So obviously won't be playing this lineup because Bryce Harper is not in, but same kind of thing here, getting to an expensive Alec Boehm, Trey Turner, and Bryce Harper along with Tyler O'Neill. So really maximizing the savings with Freeland. So that's something that's important. I would want, if I'm going to play somebody like Kyle Freeland, I want it to be lineups like that where I'm actually getting to the best parts of high upside offenses that you can't really get to unless you're willing to go down to somebody like Freeland. So it doesn't really have anything to do with him. It's not me predicting that he's going to have a great game or anything. Certainly, if he does have a good game, not going to be taking any credit as far as like, oh, I called it. But those lineups do look good when you factor in his lack of ownership, the Reds' ownership going against him, and then the ceilings that you are able to get from the hitters that you can afford by going there. Chris Bassett, getting around half the field at 8%. Certainly wouldn't mind getting to a little bit more of him. It is a good park in San Francisco. Probably going to be a pretty balanced Giants lineup. Bassett does have much, much better numbers against right-handed hitters this year, both in terms of strikeout percentage and allowing essentially no power to them, while lefties have done some damage. But I think the reason that I'm lower than the field, again, just has to do with the salary. I prefer Framber Valdez to Bassett. And then I kind of just want to go down to Montas or go down to like some cheaper guys. Bassett's not a great strikeout pitcher. You're just kind of paying a premium because of him being decent at preventing runs and pitching in a good, a favorable pitcher's park, which is fine. But, I think from a range of outcome standpoint, you can get a very similar range of outcomes for less salary. Same can be said for somebody like Charlie Morton, getting about 10% ownership. I'm not getting the much right now. He does have the second highest strikeout percentage on the slate, but he does have a pretty tough strikeout matchup against Arizona as well. And you're just paying a pretty expensive salary for him, all things considered. So where I am paying up, quote unquote, for pitching, I really would prefer to be getting to Pivetta, obviously outside of Oakland lineups. I would actually be interested. I wonder how many. I think there's a good chance that a lot of my Bassett lineups have Oakland. So yeah, here we have a Texas Oakland team. Oakland. So two of my 4 Bassett lineups have Oakland. Logan Webb lineups, I would think, are probably pretty likely for me to have Oakland. Yeah, Oakland 5-man. Oakland 5-man. So a couple Oakland stacks in there. The reason being that where I'm not playing Oakland, I really just want Nick Pivetta for the most part because he is the best strikeout pitcher. And with how inexpensive Oakland is and the fact that they're getting this sizable park bump going into Fenway Park against a pitcher that gives up home runs, if Nick Pivetta with his strikeout stuff in this matchup is not a good pitching play today, it's really, really difficult to think about how at least a couple of guys on Oakland weren't really good hitting plays, considering that they're cheap and in such a good spot for home runs. It's just not that likely that the A's like single Nick Pivetta to death and score 5 runs without anybody actually doing damage. That obviously can happen, but it's pretty. But when you think about what Pivetta does, and then also what the A's do, there are a bunch of guys that strike out or hit the ball hard. And then this game is in Fenway Park. The most likely outcomes here are either Nick Pivetta just strikes out a million guys, or the A's get to Pivetta and hit home runs. Obviously, you could also, kind of like yesterday, have Pivetta strike out a million guys and the A's hit home runs, in which case, you're kind of fine either way that you go. But it's hard for me to like envision a lot of lineups that don't have any piece of that matchup. So where I am paying up for pitching, I would expect, and not using Pivetta, I would expect, or I would want mostly to be getting to Oakland. And so I do expect that a pretty healthy percentage of my like Logan Webb, Chris Bassett, Charlie Morton lineups have some semblance of A's, and I'm perfectly fine with that. The rest of the pitching here, Michael Wacha, his ownership projection has come up from this morning. He was around 5% this morning. I said that I thought he should be around 10. He's getting around 10 now. Not getting to much of him right now, but he is somebody, Wacha, Morton, Bassett, Webb, Myers. These guys are all pretty interchangeable to me, where my actual lineups at lock, if I had 10% Wacha and 2% Myers, I wouldn't be shocked. I think they're all pretty interchangeable pieces. So a lot of it's just going to be kind of randomness, which of those guys show up the most for me. They are all just completely sort of mediocre 7 to 8K pitchers, and they're getting pretty similar ownership. So Wacha, going against St. Louis, I'd said at 5%, I thought he looked like a good tournament play because St. Louis does strike out a bit, and they are in a good pitcher's park. But again, they're not a bad offense, and Waka's not a great strikeout pitcher. He's very comparable to these other guys. Slade Ciccone, 6,300, showing up in like a lineup for me. Not a great matchup against Atlanta. Don't think he's a great pitcher. He is cheap, so he is somebody that I think is serviceable if, in case of emergency, you just need somebody like cheaper than Frankie Montas or a cheap pitcher with no ownership, and you don't want to go to Kyle Freeland. But I do expect everything that I've run today multiple times. I was testing out some stuff this afternoon, seeing what my exposures would look like. Everything I've done has been pretty heavy on these 3 pitchers, and then just like throwing darts at everybody else. So I am relatively confident that is also how my exposures, once we get to the actual slate, are going to look. If we look at the overall stacks that I'm getting to, pretty balanced today. I think yesterday I was like really aggressively on this show getting to Texas, Boston, and Oakland, or maybe it was Cincy, Boston, Oakland, some combination of that. Then I ended up not playing Cincy because of the weather, which obviously really sucked. But today things are more balanced, and I would expect to see that. It was one of the main takeaways for me on my show this morning was there's a lot of good hitters parks. There's no spot that I am looking at and just saying, oh, I have no concerns here. Like, obviously it's baseball and hitters are going to fail constantly anyway, regardless of matchup. But there was no matchup where I'm looking at it and just saying like, oh, all the boxes here are checked. There are a lot of hitters parks. There are a lot of teams with similar implied run totals. There are a lot of teams in good spots that have significant pinch hit risk that are going to pull how much I want to get to their stacks down. So I'm not really surprised that I'm getting just a lot more balance in my overall stacks here. Cincinnati against Freeland in Cincinnati, I think pretty self-explanatory that that's a good spot. Texas going up against Griffin Canning, good spot there. Canning has certainly struggled a lot this year. Texas has good hitters that have not had great years, but do have the track record and pedigree that we know that they're good hitters. What that does in DFS is pulls their salary down because salaries are related, at least in part, to what players have done to date. And so you essentially get a Texas team that has disappointed to date, so their salaries are cheap, but knowing that guys generally are going to play to the back of their baseball card, you can view them as underpriced, and then you're allowed to get really good pitching or one-offs around a high upside Texas team in a good park. So they make a lot of sense. I already talked about Oakland a lot when I was talking about Pivetta, but this is a team that, five-man stacking, you can. You're going to get some really high upside talent around that stack, and it is a good park. But also as far as mini stacks go, if you're not playing Pivetta, like let's say you're going to a pretty expensive primary stack that is going to make it kind of tough to get Pivetta at his price tag into your lineups, you can go like Montas plus Valdez at pitcher, and then just grab a couple Oakland guys. Hope that they happen to be the ones that hit, 2 or 3 home runs combined off of Pivetta. Pivetta has a pedestrian game, and then you just win it with your couple of home runs from the Oakland guys, and then whatever main stack you got to. So Oakland, I think, is a really, really powerful stack, not only because of the upside of their matchup, too. You have to keep in mind, Pivetta is getting a bunch of ownership. So if Oakland does go off or does, at least hit a few home runs for you, not only are you gaining on just the lineups that don't have those Oakland hitters, but you're gaining on the lineups that have Nick Pivetta. So you get that piece as well. Just a really, really powerful team to get to. Boston showing up quite a bit for me. Atlanta showing up quite a bit. Happy with both of those teams. Fenway Park obviously is really good. The matchup against JP Sears in Fenway Park looks very good for the Red Sox. JP Sears has an expected ISO against right-handed hitters around like 220 this season, and then he's pitching in Fenway Park. So not only is he getting a substantial park downgrade as far as pitching in Fenway versus pitching in the Coliseum, but what he specifically struggles with is right-handed power. And now he's going into a stadium where the wall in left field is 310 feet away from home plate. Obviously, it's really, really tall, but right-handed power plays up in Fenway. The concern with the Red Sox, and I mentioned this a second ago, not having any perfect teams on the slate. The concern with the Red Sox, you look at their lineup, Rob Refsnyder hitting second. He's a good value play when you just look at, points per dollar, but there's a pretty good chance he ends up getting pinch hit for. Yoshida is in the lineup, and Devers, Duran, and Yoshida are all in the lineup as lefties, but those are the only lefties in the lineup. So there's a good chance that you get into the bullpen later and a right-handed pitcher comes in and Refsnyder turns into Willie or Abreu. So that knocks down how excited you can be about him a little bit. Still an okay play, but he's going to get ownership and he's probably not going to finish the game. Same can be said for Romy Gonzalez. Same can be said for Jamie Westbrook. At least one of those two, pretty likely to get pinch hit for by Dom Smith, I would think, later on in the game. Now, Gonzalez is playing first base. Westbrook is playing second. Gonzalez can move to second. So it's not a guarantee which of them Smith were to pinch hit for, but he's probably pinch hitting for somebody. So the platoon pieces in the Red Sox lineup do offer you value, but they're also probably going to get some ownership, and they are also pretty likely to get pinch hit for later in the game. Double checking Boston's bench to see if I forgot any left-handed bats that they can go to. But yeah, you have Dominic Smith, Willie Abreu are the two. Oh, David Hamilton is the third. So you could get conceivably all three of those guys pinch hit for, where Abreu hits for Refsnyder and then plays the outfield. Smith hits for Gonzalez and then plays first base. Hamilton hits for Westbrook and then plays second base. And then you're just, looking at your 5-man Red Sox stack in the 7th inning and you only have 2 hitters left from it. So not saying that you just, completely X those guys out, but that does pull down. It makes the Red Sox look less good than they would if those guys just didn't have pinch hit risk. I'm still getting to some Refsnyder. I'm still getting to some Gonzalez, a very small amount of Westbrook. I really wouldn't be upset if I lost even a little bit more of Refsnyder and Gonzalez just because they are pretty popular. But they're cheap enough that I think they're okay. But there is legitimate pinch hit risk there, and I did account for that. My projections on these guys are a little bit lower than I think the industry in general for the most part, because I am trying to factor that in as much as I can, and I am still getting to them. But obviously would like this team a lot more as a stack if you didn't have to worry about those guys. Atlanta going up against Ciccone, I think is an interesting team. I talked about it on the show this morning, but Ciccone's been a reverse splits guy so far during his time in the major leagues. And if you look at the pitches that he throws, there's a pretty good reason for it. His changeup, he throws 28% of the time to lefties, has allowed basically no power this season. And going back to last season, he's thrown it 23% of the time, very little power allowed. His slider hasn't really played up so far in the major leagues. 197 expected ISO with only an 11% swinging strike percentage since last year. Only a 10% swinging strike percentage on it this year with a 180 or 258 rather expected ISO allowed. So when you look at what he's throwing, it makes sense that he has had issues with right-handed power specifically. 230 expected ISO against righties since debuting last year. 225 so far this year. Austin Riley, Marcelo Ozuna, Sean Murphy, those guys look pretty good here as right-handed power bats that can do a lot of damage against him. Not to say that you can't play the lefties. Obviously Jared Kelenic is cheap. Ozzy Albies is good. Matt Olson is really good. But it does, I'm not getting to them as much as I guess I would like. But from a stacking standpoint, the Braves do offer a nice combination of value and then have right-handed power bats that can do damage against Ciccone. So I do like them as a stack. And again, wouldn't be upset if I started getting a little bit more of like Riley, although he is pretty expensive. Sean Murphy, a catcher. So those are the 5 stacks that I'm like getting to the most as far as all stack types. And then it drops off, getting into some Pittsburgh, Colorado, Philadelphia, the Mets. Philadelphia might come down a little bit. I don't know. Could come down a little bit once I adjust for their actual lineup not having Bryce Harper. The counterpoint to that is that they are going to be less expensive because they don't have Bryce Harper. Taking a quick look at, I need to refresh, but what that lineup actually looks like. Yeah, they're still not cheap. And the guys that are cheap, I don't really want a ton of. Sosa, Garrett Stubbs, guys like that. So I wouldn't be surprised if I get a little bit less Philly now just because I can't play Harper. But a lot of like secondary stacks here. Now looking at the 5-mans, Oakland does fall off a bit. You can see here I have 3 Oakland 5-mans. This is out of 50 lineups, by the way. I would have 4 2-mans, 2 3-mans, a couple of 4-mans. So they do fall down a little bit. Texas, Atlanta, Pittsburgh gets pushed up a little bit. So where I am getting to Pittsburgh, I'm kind of full stacking them more often than using them as mini stacks, it looks like. I thought that Colorado, earlier at least, Colorado was a team I was getting to a lot as a 5-man. Now it looks like I'm getting there as a 4-man. But they are a team where I view them a little bit differently than Oakland because they don't have as much power throughout their lineup as Oakland does. They have some competent hitters still, but Oakland, I think, just kind of gives you a little bit more depth in their lineup, as weird as that is, because they're still not very good. But when I think about like Colorado versus Oakland here, they're both in good hitters parks. They're both facing popular pitchers. But with Colorado, I do like in a perfect world, I think I get to more full stacks, 4 and 5-man stacks of them because Montas isn't that good of a pitcher. And there's a pretty good chance that Colorado can just have a solid game against him. Whereas Pivetta, I think that it's kind of hard to explain, but like I think that like Pivetta is obviously a better pitcher than Montas. There's a lot of times that game plays out where Pivetta doesn't give up 5-6 runs. He just gives up like 2 home runs and trying to grab those 2 home runs from Oakland without, full stacking and making the assumption that Pivetta gets lit up makes sense to me. Whereas, I think Montas just gets full on blown up more often than Pivetta does because he's just not as good a pitcher. So I do think that makes sense where, maybe getting to a little bit more a higher percentage rather of my Colorado stacks being full stacks, whereas a lot of my Oakland is mini stacks. I think that makes sense to me. Love the hat. Will Gunnar go yard today? Gunnar going yard is a good assumption pretty much any day. I think I have 20. I have a pretty good amount of him on the turbo slate. I think I don't have that pulled up in front of me, but yeah, obviously love Gunnar every day. Mets probably chalky tonight. Yeah, they should be pretty popular, I think. So now looking at some individual hitters. Highest owned guy for me right now, Corey Seager. I mentioned this on a show the other day, but generally my highest owned hitters end up coming in around 30% for me. It's by design, but it's not like forced. It's just that generally when you factor in how likely any given hitter, regardless of matchup, is to fail, generally that's just kind of the range that players start at and then filter down for me. So I do like seeing that. I do always get a little bit concerned. Like yesterday, I ended up playing like 50% of Keston Hiura for some reason. Like I don't know why. I hated it when I saw it. Obviously, it didn't work out either. But normally, you're kind of going to see my hitter exposures look like this, just starting around 30% and getting filtered down. The hitters that I'm getting the most of, all in pretty good lineup spots, which is nice. Corey Seager, Josh Smith, both from Texas. Connor Wong, a strong catching option from Boston. Jared Kelenic offering some value for Atlanta. Wyatt Langford, same for Texas. Tyler O'Neill, I think one of your best home run bets on the slate. I don't mean that as far as like go bet it, because I have no idea what the price is or if there's value on it, but just as far as if you tell me I have to pick somebody that's going to hit a home run, Tyler O'Neill is obviously pretty far up the list there. Jonathan India back in the lineup, at least for now. He got scratched yesterday. Kyle Freeland's not great at holding runners, so you do get a little bit of added upside for Jonathan India there. He'll run a little bit. Candelario is pretty cheap. Shea Langoliers, I love using him at catcher. Obviously in non-Pavetta lineups, but catcher is such a hard position to get upside at. The opportunity cost isn't very high. Why not just roll the dice on one of the best power hitting catchers in the league in Langoliers against the popular pitcher that does give up home runs in a park that favors right-handed power? Love getting there. The field's only projected at like 7% too. I love that play. Obviously won't be getting to Harper. Marcus Semien going along with these Texas guys. Brandon Drury, I think, is a really interesting value play today. Michael Lorenzen isn't a terrible pitcher going up against him, but Michael Lorenzen has allowed a 246 expected ISO, sorry, a 251 expected ISO to right-handed hitters so far this year, 209 going back to last season. Brandon Drury is really cheap, does have some power upside in a good hitter's park. I like him as a one-off. I like him in mini stacks. So I do like at 4 to 5% ownership that he's showing up quite a bit for me. I think that's a very good way. He's a good way to get some value in your lineup without sacrificing upside. And like I was saying with Langoliers too, second base isn't the best position. So I really don't mind just kind of punting that with Brandon Drury and hoping for the best. Getting to Rob Refsnyder around 14%, as I mentioned before. Wouldn't be upset if that comes down just because I do think he's getting pinch hit for, but he is hitting at the top of the order as well. So you could still get like 3 at-bats out of him. And then the other thing to keep in mind too, there is always a chance that, especially if he's in a full stack, if the Red Sox just go nuts and they throw 10 runs on JP Sears in the first couple of innings, they can just give their left-handed bats a day off. So that's the other part of this pinch hit thing is like, if it's a competitive game, Refsnyder's almost definitely getting pinch hit for. But if it's a competitive game, the Red Sox stack probably wasn't doing a ton in the first place, or Oakland was just, keeping up with them and it's like 9-8 or something. So what you're really missing out on with somebody like Refsnyder is if the Red Sox are playing like, a 4-3 game and then they light up the A's bullpen in the 7th, 8th, and 9th, Refsnyder is probably not a part of it. But if the Red Sox just get to JP Sears, Refsnyder's chances of being pinch hit for do go down a bit just because if it's 10-2 in the 7th inning and the A's bring in a right-handed reliever, the Red Sox probably aren't going to make any of their left-handed guys come in and hit. They're probably just going to say like, okay, let's get Refsnyder in at bat against a righty. Who cares? So there is that, as well. Keith Vape said, question for you, why play it if you don't like it? When I say I don't like it, I'm basically saying that I see things about it I don't like. There are negatives, in this case, the pinch hit risk. But like I was saying before, I've already, any good projections you use are factoring in pinch hit risk. I've also adjusted on my own for pinch hit risk because I don't really think that industry projections do a very good job of it in general. So I've already done it. And then he's still showing up for me. If I didn't adjust already for his pinch hit risk, he'd probably be showing up even more than he is because he's such a good point per dollar value. So at the end of the day, I'm still going to let my process sort out everything that I'm doing, everything that I'm playing, using the inputs that I gave it. The inputs I gave it account for Rob Refsnyder having significant pitch hit risk. So when I say that, I wouldn't mind if that came down, I'm not going to be upset if I just don't play a popular guy that might not get more than 2 or 3 at bats. But I've already accounted for that in the inputs that I put in. So I'm not going to then just remove him also. If I hadn't accounted for it, again, I would just probably be getting more. So I pretty strongly trust my process to do what it's supposed to do. I spent a lot of time working on that. So it's just a matter of double checking. If I get something early in the day, sometimes I'll get something and say, I don't like it. And then I'll look at it more throughout the day and be like, oh, well, I don't think this is being accounted for enough. I need to change this. And then I'll rerun stuff and end up not getting them as much. But in this case, this 5 o'clock show, I've already talked about the pinch hit risk for the Red Sox this morning. I've already made sure that my stuff is factoring that in to a degree that I'm comfortable with. And he's still showing up some. So it's kind of whatever. Adolis Garcia, Spencer Steer, again, decent stolen base matchup for him. He runs a bit, gives you first base outfield eligibility, good matchup against Freeland. Zach Galoff, I like. Again, paying down at second base seems pretty useful today. Kind of seems like I'm either getting to Albies or Semien paying up, or I'm going down to Drury or Galoff. But Geloff's another guy that he has upside because he can run. Pavetta's not very good at controlling the running game, and he's a right-handed bat with some power in Fenway Park. So I do like getting there. Then you also get the negative correlation with Pavetta. JJ Bleday, Brent Rooker, just more Oakland guys against Pavetta. Kyler Stevenson, another pretty cheap catcher with some power in a good spot against Freeland. O'Neal Cruz obviously depends on the Pirates lineup. He is pretty expensive. I didn't downgrade him. So this is something that I didn't do it earlier in the day. Maybe I'll do it after the show. I'm not sure. Kind of feel like he should be downgraded a little bit just because some of his value comes from stolen bases and he's dealing with a hamstring injury. So I don't know that he'll run. That being said, he doesn't run it's not like it's Ellie De La Cruz with a hamstring injury. So it's probably good enough how it is as far as his projection goes. But that would be something where, maybe if you're playing one lineup and there's a tiebreaker and you can't decide between O'Neal Cruz and somebody else, that could be a little bit of a tiebreaker that, if he does play, he's probably a little bit less likely to steal bases than normal. So yeah, the hitting exposures, I think, pretty much make sense for me here. There's nobody that I'm looking at and saying, wow, why do I have that guy or anything like that? Seeing where I'm getting most over the field compared to projected ownership, Josh Smith, Jared Kelenic, Corey Seager, Connor Wong, Wyatt Langford. None of these guys are super low owned, but I am getting quite a bit more than the field. As far as actual low owned guys, O'Neal Cruz, Zach Geloff, Brandon Drury. Again, I love that Geloff and Drury just aren't getting any ownership. And I can play them for cheap and get upside at low ownership. Maybe they do end up coming in 7 or 8% owned instead of 3 or 4. But even so, I'd be happy to get to them. Termite in chat said, thanks for the info. One bat flip. Nice. I saw your name at the top. I recognized that as soon as it popped up. So congrats. That's a huge win. Obviously, I'm sure it felt really, really good. I would like to get one of those soon. So congrats on that. Happy to hear it. As far as popular guys that I'm not getting to, Bobby Witt Jr., kind of forgot the game was on the slate, but Bobby Witt Jr., I'm not getting there. I think that's probably a function of getting to Corey Seager a lot, getting to O'Neal Cruz. If O'Neal Cruz doesn't play, maybe I start getting more Bobby Witt Jr. just as a one-off. But overall, that's a game that I don't really love getting to. The guy pitching for St. Louis has been starting at AAA this year. He's made one relief appearance for the Cardinals. I would guess, can give you 75 pitches or so today. But it's not a good hitter's park on a slate where you have a lot of good hitter's parks. He projects as an okay starting pitcher, and then you're getting the bullpen behind them. Obviously, playing Bobby Witt is always fine. He gives you stolen base upside. He's a great hitter, all of that. I won't be upset if I end up, getting 10% Bobby Witt or whatever, but I'm not there right now. I'm not getting to Altuve. That's another one where I don't really have a specific reason for it. Other than, I guess, Semien and Albies are the second baseman that I have to be paying up for. I am getting to more Atlanta stacks and more Texas stacks than Houston stacks. So that's probably just replacing Altuve with Semien and Albies when I pay up. And then I do like that as a position to pay down and go to the low-owned Geloff or Drury. So that's probably why it doesn't have anything to do with Altuve. It's just where else I'm going at the position. Rhys Hines, getting a bunch of ownership. I don't have any issue with the ownership. He's cheap. He gives you stolen base upside. He gives you power upside. He is just somebody I'm not getting to a ton. He is, hitting at the bottom of the order. He's relatively popular. There's no shortage of good outfield plays on the slate. So that's a spot where I'm just playing some other, more proven hitters. But, again, he's talented and all of that. I'm not really getting the Nimmo against Corbin. Not getting to Iglesias against Corbin. I mean, that's a spot where not that 8% ownership is anything crazy, but, Iglesias really is the kind of guy that I think he would be a guy you play in cash games either, but his profile is somebody that I either want him in stacks, I want him in cash games, or I don't want him. He's not hitting home runs. He's not stealing a bunch of bases for you. 8 to 10% owned Jose Iglesias one-off seems pretty shitty to me in large field tournaments. I'm not really getting to Met stacks a ton. That was a team actually that I'm surprised I wasn't getting more of, but the park isn't good for power. I'm not getting to a lot of their stacks. I wouldn't really want Iglesias outside of stacks, I don't think. Yordan Alvarez, again, this probably just goes back to I'm not getting a lot of Astro stacks. If I started getting more Astro stacks, I'm sure my Altuve and Alvarez would go up. But as is, I'm stacking teams that have good outfielders that I want to play. 5K Rooker on Oakland, $5,300, I think it is, O'Neal on Boston, 50 whatever $100 Ozuna on Atlanta. So they're just cutting into my Alvarez, Ohtani, Fermin, Garcia. Again, I'm just not getting to Kansas City. Altuve, or Ohtani rather. I'm not really getting the Dodger stacks, and I'm not paying up that far for most guys. So I'm just not getting to him, even though the ceiling is obviously really high. Yeah, Ryan Stubbs, bat flip is the $18 flagship on DraftKings. So those are the guys I'm not getting to from an offensive standpoint. Pitcher wise, I don't have any Severino right now. A little surprising to me, but I don't love the matchup either. The Nats don't strike out a lot. The park is good for pitching. Severino's not a great strikeout pitcher, but he's definitely just in that bucket with Michael Wacha and Tobias Myers and those guys where if my 10% Tobias Myers turned into Severino, I wouldn't be shocked. But he's just kind of a guy. I'm not getting the Morton as much as the field, not getting the Wacha as much as the field. I already talked about those guys. So unless there's Stephen Leibowitz said, are you getting much on the Royals or even Frazier at leadoff? So first, I'm not sure that I had the Kansas City. Yeah, I didn't have the Kansas City lineup when I ran this. So that could change if their lineup is out and it's different than was projected. Yeah, so Adam Frazier leading off. That does open up some value. Michael Massey hitting fifth. Let me see what Kansas City lineup I had projected or who was in it. Looks like I had Witt, Garcia, Pasquantino, Massey, Perez, Renfroe, Isbell, Melendez, Fermin. So I didn't have Adam Frazier in my projected lineup. Yeah, so that's what I had on the screen. I didn't have Adam Frazier in there, so maybe he pulls Kansas City up a little bit. He's another guy, kind of like I was talking about with Iglesias. Obviously, with him leading off, like I would rather play him than Iglesias if you're just punting second base. But I don't really want him as a one-off. Like I would rather be playing Brandon Drury or Zach Galoff as cheap second base one-offs because of their power upside and the parks that they're playing in. So maybe Frazier like pulls up Kansas City stacks for me, and that gets me some more Bobby Witt, some more Pasquantino, some more Sal Perez, which obviously like I'd be happy with any of that. But ideally, I would like to either be getting to Frazier in one-offs or in stacks rather, or not getting to him because I really don't want to look at a bunch of lineups and be like, like just thinking about the idea of like this lineup started off really well and I have player innings remaining. What do I have? And it's like, oh, Adam Frazier by himself as second baseman. It's just so hard to envision that going well because he's just not that type of player. So ideally, if I am getting to him when I rerun stuff, it will also be pulling up like Bobby Witt and Perez and Pasquantino. So if nobody else has any questions, I think that's pretty much everything I have here. Covered everything that I'm getting to, everything I'm not getting to. Keith Ape or somebody, Keith Ape said Nats unowned with upside. Kind of like Severino's not a great pitcher. The reason I think that I'm not getting to the Nats here, and that probably most of the field's not getting to the Nats, is you just have to consider all of the parks on this slate. Philadelphia, Boston, Cincinnati, Milwaukee, Angel Stadium, all favorable hitters parks. There's not a lot of good pitching on the slate, so most of the offenses in those parks are going to be in pretty good matchups. The Nats don't have as much power as a lot of offenses on this slate, and they're in a park that's really difficult to hit home runs. Again, that's not saying that they can't have success against Severino because he's not great, but with this being a 10-game slate, you just have a lot of good offenses in better spots that are going to be like collectively, 7-8% owned that you don't really need to go down to the Nats. So that's why I'm not getting to them too much if I'm actually getting to them at all. But, again, it's not like Severino's infallible or anything like that. Termite said, late to the party, who's your most exposed pitcher? I'd rather not say, but it is Frankie Montas. It's Frankie Montas right now. It was Frankie Montas when I ran this afternoon. Framber Valdez is right there as well. Like it could end up being Valdez, but every time I've run stuff today, the trio of Montas, Valdez, Pivetta has been the pitching that I'm getting to the most. So I assume that's just going to be what I'm rolling with tonight. So other than that, thanks again for checking out the show. Hope you all enjoyed it. Don't forget to hit the thumbs up button, subscribe to the channel. Also check out the Endgame Syndicate link in the description below if you have not already signed up there. That is me, Utica, Nerdy Tenor, Brick75, talking intermediate and high level DFS strategy, training videos, Discord access, Q&As every month with the entire team. So check that out if you haven't already, and I'll see you back here tomorrow.